Gospel reading is from Luke 24, verses 1 to 12. I'll be reading in German and you'll find the English translation in your bulletin. Aber am ersten Tag der Woche, sehr früh, kamen sie zum Grab und trugen bei sich die wohlriechenden Öle, die sie bereitet hatten. Sie fanden aber den Stein, weggewälzt von dem Grab, und gingen hinein und fanden den Leib des Herrn Jesus Christus nicht. Und als sie darüber ratlos waren, siehe, da traten zu ihnen 2 Männer in glänzenden Kleidern. Sie aber erschraken und neigten ihr Angesicht zur Erde. Da sprachen die zu ihnen: Was sucht ihr den Lebenden bei den Toten? Er ist nicht hier, er ist auferstanden. Gedenkt daran, wie er euch gesagt hat, als er noch in Galiläa war und sprach: Der Menschensohn muss überantwortet werden in die Hände der Sünder und gekreuzigt werden und am 3. Tage auferstehen. Und sie gedachten an seine Worte. Und sie gingen wieder weg vom Grab und verkündigten das alles den 11 und allen anderen Jüngern. Es waren aber Maria Magdalena und Johanna und Maria, des Jakobus Mutter, und die anderen Frauen mit ihnen. Die sagten das den Aposteln. Und es erschienen ihnen diese Worte, als wäre es Geschwätz, und sie glaubten ihnen nicht. Petrus aber stand auf und lief zum Grab und bückte sich hinein und sah nur die Leinentücher und ging davon und wunderte sich über das, was geschehen war. The Gospel of the Lord.
So here we are with this story. For those of you who joined us this morning at the lake, you'll know that we actually heard a different telling of the same story. For those of you that do not speak German, you have no idea what story we just told, so I'm going to share it with you. We are in Luke. Luke, I think, does the best and most dramatic job of telling us something important is happening. He does all of these great stories where we're kind of wandering through the countryside. We spoke recently about the parable of the prodigal son. And so it was all of these moments of storytelling, and then as soon as we get toward Holy Week, so before we get to the cross, before we get to the tomb, before we get to Easter, he turns into what I call a metronome. We have our metronome expert right up front, so hopefully I don't get it wrong. But there's this very punctuated, slow, painful march, the way that Luke tells the story. And this is after that. So we are Easter people. It is Easter morning. So John picks up and it says, but on the first day of the week. Okay, that's how we know we're going to hear about something better than what we just heard. We went through the hard stuff. Now we're ready for the good stuff. And how does this play out? On the first day, they being the women, the men had stood at the foot of the cross until it got too hot for them. They feared for themselves, and so they went and they hid. Some of them left the country, others got on boats, some of them just stayed in the upper room, and they clung together and they hoped for the best. The women went to work. Okay, we need to purify his body. We need to prepare him for burial. This is somebody we love. They have died. This is what you have to do. No matter what the repercussions, this is what you have to do. We've made commitments to this person. And so they show up. And depending on which gospel you're reading, it's a different cast of characters that show up. But here's the important part. Mary Magdalene and other women. Let's go with that. So in John, it's Joanna and it's Mary, the mother of James. If you're in other ones, it's Mary and Mary, or Mary and Martha. Mary and the women show up to do the hard work. They discover that the tomb is empty. We know that. We're not surprised. We've heard the story. We're okay with that. They were in shock. In John, they're visited by 2 angels who try to tell them, Why did you come to a graveyard looking for somebody who's alive? This is where dead folks are. And it still doesn't quite connect until they actually meet Jesus. If church is about the gathering of those of us who are Easter people, those of us who recognize the resurrected Christ, there was a time where these two women were the entire church. And who do they go and tell? They tell everybody. Who believes them? Nobody. Who says this is idle women's talk? Peter. Do you remember Peter? We talked about him. You are the rock on which I will build my church. Well, if he's the rock, Mary's the one standing on top of him going, here's your church. So it's a very interesting balance. He's the one that eventually shows up. It's St. Mary Magdalene. That's why we put saint in front of the name. And it's why I have these right here. These are my family's Easter tradition. And they're not always easy to pull off depending on where you're living in the world, but they're very slippery, so my apologies. They kind of look like mahogany or wood, don't they, at this stage? Yes, I can trust your family. Catch. Oh, look at that. You've got it? What is it? What is it? It's an egg. What color is it? It's brown. It's kind of mahogany. It's kind of wood-ish. These are colored with onion skins. So you keep the skins from the onions forever. And then you put them all in a pot, and my grandmother's just so meticulous about the whole thing. We did what we could. And these eggs come out of it, and you butter them, and they're beautiful, and they are hard-boiled eggs. And they are a beautiful thing. And this would have been absolutely fairly normal in the life at that time. This would have been a symbol of fertility. It would have been a symbol of spring, cold and hard, but life wants to break forth, especially with the winter that we've had. I think we understand how Arctic tundra works. So this symbol would have absolutely been known at the time. And there were times of year where these items were celebrated and traded. Now they're a part of this tradition. There are folks that have often pointed out Christmas trees and Easter eggs. They're part of these pagan festivals, and Christians have taken them over. What an odd thought. You can always give something different meaning or new meaning. And it is a part of our Easter tradition. And sometimes I think we want to look at it like, Santa Claus and Coca-Cola, kind of commercializing the whole thing. But this is really the original way that it was celebrated. And not only was it celebrated this way, but this is a story I love to tell. Pastor Christian always loved to do the story of the first Advent wreath, which I have now stolen, and it's my favorite. But this is my other first favorite. St. Mary Magdalene. She was the church. She went and told everybody, remember the guy? We loved him. He said he was going to rise. Then he rose, and then he's right over there. And they were like, oh, these women, they just keep gossiping. And she was like, no, he's just right there. He told me to come and tell this. He told me you were going to doubt him. And they did. So there was a while that she was the church. She was a formidable woman. You often see these very polite and demure-looking statues of her. The church, St. Mary Magdalene, over here in the annex, when you look in the narthex and you see the statue of St. Mary Magdalene, she's like this. And you think, I'm afraid to even walk in there. She looks like she's going to get me. It looks like my mother when I've done something just remotely bad. But she's the one that struck out as a formidable woman and a lady of considerable means. And she went to the emperor. She didn't go to and we have a change of names depending on our gospel. She didn't go to the people who were responsible for the crucifixion of Christ. She didn't go to Pilate, who we talk about in our creeds. She didn't go to Herod, who was responsible for the area. She had a full Karen moment. She was like, I would like to speak with your supervisor now. And she did. And she trucked off to Rome. And she trucked off to Rome with eggs because she knew how to tell a story. She knew, especially as a woman, how to talk about life coming from this space. And she took the egg and she stood there in front of the emperor. I can only imagine what the conversations were like between the front gate, "Hi, you've not met me, I'd like to speak with the emperor," and actually getting into that room. But again, formidable woman. And she walks in with a white egg, and she is ready to tell him the story of her personal Savior. He's not ready for it. And he mocks her, and he mocks her incessantly. And he says to her, "You are going to explain this to me, what this criminal did, what this person who's trying to overthrow our system did? You're going to try to explain this with an egg." She said, "Yep, I am. Have a seat, have a listen, let's do this." She holds the egg out. And he said, "I am no more going to pay attention to you than that egg in your hand is red." And the egg turned red. And she stood there with a red egg in her hand. The emperor realized, I've missed something here. We need to back this up before I find myself in serious trouble. And he ends up saying, "Give me your list of complaints, madam." And she does. Herod did this. He shouldn't have. Pilate did that. He should not have. Who are the people that you're putting in charge of these places? This is what they're doing. They are running amok in these places. So he said, round them up. This will be their last day. She went in, she stood there, and boldly held something fragile in her hand. She may have been wealthy, but she wasn't armed. She wasn't equipped. She did not have on armor. She did not have 25 people with her. She had an egg, something so fragile that we all in that era and today know as a great way of discussing things like new life, a bit of an anomaly in the barnyard. That's all she had when she walked in there. And she went to the man who's the boss of the man who crucified the most powerful person she could ever thought of meeting in her life. And she boldly proclaimed the resurrection. She showed him how an egg opens and how nourishment can come from this whole cold shell like a tomb. She showed him. God showed up. I mean, she didn't have, maybe she did, have some trick up her sleeve, how to make this thing snap and turn red, which is the reason for the shoe choice today, if you're wondering how that happened. So she showed up with every expectation that God was going to show up. God showed up, and big things happened for a woman who is armed with an egg. Isn't that a great story? That's what happens after this, our gospel story. This is what happens. Do we want to capture in the Gospels the story of two women who ended up being in the church and overthrowing a government? No, it doesn't sound quite as good as some of the other gentlemen going and doing it. But lo and behold, the reason that we're here today is because of a woman and an egg. A woman whose love kept her at the foot of the cross until he breathed his last. A woman who got up at the break of dawn, knowing this might mean her life, and went to go and offer purification rites for somebody that she loved. A woman that went to tell every soul she could lay eyes on, whether or not it cost her her life. And then she went and stood in front of an emperor with an egg.